Hey, thanks for checking out this video. So today we're going to be looking at the animation principle, overlapping action. It's a really important principle. You've probably seen it quite a bit before, and you may have a pretty strong understanding of it already. But in this video, I kind of want to go over the basics of overlapping action, and then also look at how I typically like to think of overlapping action and really pushing it beyond just thinking about it for things like tails and hair and cloth, and really thinking about overlapping action and how it kind of ties your entire animation together, and it's something you should be implementing to really every aspect of your animation. So to begin in this video, I want to take a look at overlapping action at its kind of basic fundamental level, and then we're going to take a look at a few game examples to look at overlapping action, and then I actually want to jump into an animation demo inside of Blender where I can kind of demonstrate overlapping action and how you can think about implementing it into more areas of your animation. And this demo is going to be done in Blender. I like to kind of bounce between Maya and Blender. I love using both of these 3D applications for animation. So today we're going to be using Blender for this, but obviously you can gain the same information and use these same principles in any 3D application you use. So to begin with, let's take a look at overlapping action in a pretty basic example, one you may have seen in the past here. So let me go ahead and play this. So basically what we have are these 5 balls just bouncing evenly, the exact same timing. And what we get is this sort of robotic feeling to these bounces. So again, everything is moving at the exact same time and everything is happening at the exact same time. But if we were to simply just start offsetting these bounces, basically one frame from one another, it's going to immediately kind of break up the rhythm of this animation, create something with a lot more appeal to it, and obviously kind of give you that sort of traditional overlapping feeling that you often see in animation or talked about in animations. So we have these 5 balls basically offset one frame from one another. So we have the offset in the timing of the bounces, and you can see immediately that's going to give us this nice kind of rhythm to the bounce, this really nice offset between each of the bounces. And you can look at this almost like maybe a tail for a character. And you can see how something like this could be utilized to create kind of that flowing feeling maybe for a tail. So this is kind of just a fundamental look at kind of overlapping action and how you could implement it into an animation by simply just starting to offset sort of the timing of your animation and the timing of things happening from one another. So this next example I want to take a look at is of Aloy from Horizon Forbidden West, and looking at overlapping action and all the kind of accessories on the armor and her hair. Obviously, all these pieces you can see are overlapping from the body, so it's breaking up the movement. It's giving you a much more believable feel to her movement. We have the hair, this really nice hair simulation that's happening on her that's giving the hair a really nice feeling to it, feeling of weight to her hair as well. And then we obviously have things like the pieces of her armor and then the cloth on her pants. All of this is really working together to really add a lot of believability and realism to this movement when we have all these pieces kind of offset from one another. You can see on this run here that she does, we have the offset, the bounces kind of offset on her quiver here on her hip, kind of offset from the actual bounces of her hip. So all of this stuff is working together to create some really nice, believable movement here. And this is, again, kind of a fundamental look at overlapping action. And this example right here is probably where you'll see this principle kind of pointed out of being utilized here, are these kind of like secondary motions here on this animation. But this next example here I want to take a look at is in Red Dead Redemption 2. And this is overlapping action, but it's not just overlapping action on things like cloth or tail or that kind of thing. It's really looking at the overlapping action of the entire body and how all of that works together, again, to create something that just feels much more believable and fluid. Because when you're moving, naturally, not everything is going to move at the exact same time, right? You'll have, the up and down of your body, and then the up and down of the arms are going to be offset from that. So if we take a look at him riding here, you can see just how much offset we're getting with the up and down in the arms, and then the up and down of just the entire body kind of moving up and down with the horse. So basically what we're getting here is this horse is moving, and we have the up and down movement of the horse, and then the up and down movement of the character is going to be offset from that. And then things like his chest is going to be offset a little bit from the up and down of his hips. So we're getting this nice kind of offset feeling on his chest, which is really loosening things up and adding more kind of weight to this movement. And then obviously we have the offset of the arms. So all of these things are working together, and these can all be kind of considered overlapping action. And sometimes it can get confusing with some of the principles where, you have overlapping action, and then there's also like follow through and lead and follow. But all of those things are pretty similar, but I like to kind of bring all of those things together into the principle of overlapping action. And on this example as well, you can see we have the satchel on his hip, obviously bouncing, and those bounces are offset from the horse and then his body. And then we actually have just the flap of the satchel kind of offset from the regular bounces that are happening on that object as well. And then obviously we have the tail on the horse. So again, all of this stuff is working together, and it's not really just a principle that's only tied to very like secondary type of objects of like just the horse's mane or just the tail or maybe just the jacket on the character. Overlapping action is really used throughout this entire animation to kind of bring it all together. So now let's actually jump into the animation demo here, and we're going to be doing this all inside of Blender. What I have here is this ball character with the tail, and this is going to be kind of a traditional way to look at overlapping action. Obviously, animating something like a tail is a great way to kind of get comfortable with overlapping action, but I also want to talk about kind of overlapping action for, the entire character and how all of that kind of works together in this demo. So what I have here is this ball character, and basically what I've created is just simple up and down movement here. So we have a couple bounces, kind of stops there, and then it does kind of like a final large bounce at the end. So again, this is a very basic example. I'm not going to have it actually moving forward or backward. It's going to be bouncing in place. But I want to look at overlapping action that we can really start to layer in all the detail that we need into this animation. And another great way to kind of visualize overlapping action is by utilizing a layered approach like I'm going to use here, where we're slowly layering on more and more detail, and each kind of layer that we add is going to really bring this animation to life. Because right now, obviously, we have the tail kind of completely stiff in this one pose, and all we have is the up and down motion of the ball. So the first thing that I'm going to do is kind of begin to animate some of the rotation on this character. And we're going to want to use the rotate Y for this, and I'm probably going to do this kind of mainly in the graph editor. It might make it a little bit easier here to start kind of blocking this in the graph editor. So what I'm going to do is, as the ball drops, I'm going to think about kind of the rotation that would happen. Now, one thing that I want to make sure that I'm doing is that I don't want this to feel like just a ball. I want it to actually feel like a character. So the overlapping that we're going to get in the rotation, I don't want it to just be kind of drag that's happening. I want to feel like this character is actually intentionally trying to jump. And that's where this rotation is going to come into play to kind of help sell that. So like on this drop, I'm going to go ahead and insert a key here, press I on my keyboard, and I'll do only selected channels to drop a keyframe here. And I'm going to start tweaking this rotate Y. So the ball is kind of starting to point down as it's dropping. And we might actually add a bit of rotation on frame 0 so it's not completely flat. It's already got a little bit of rotation on that. All right, so we might bring this keyframe over a little bit. So you can see we're getting some rotation like that. We might exaggerate the amount of rotation. And then as soon as it hits, we have that jump in spacing, so the ball is going to pop up. And then we want to insert another keyframe here. And I really want to bring this rotation more like that. So you can see the kind of springiness that we're getting here. And I feel like I may need to move this keyframe back one frame to start the rotation a little bit earlier, something like that. All right, so maybe here we'll probably want to add another keyframe and keep it kind of rotating, maybe more like that through this section. And then it's going to start to kind of even out, add another keyframe, and then this is going to start kind of doing what we did before. So we're getting this kind of motion here. Now this pop is happening way too fast. I'm going to shift this over a couple frames. Kind of tweak it here. And we can look at the timing here of how this is feeling. And the timing isn't feeling quite right. So let me take a look at what I could do. And I'm actually going to shrink my timeline down a little bit to actually what we need to work with here. So I think what I'm feeling is this rotation this way is delayed too much. So I might shift this over a couple frames. Something like that might feel better. Maybe it continues kind of rotating that way. All right. And then here, it's going to hit and it holds here before it bounces again. So maybe on this, I might do some rotation like this. It might come down, have like a little bit of a bounce to it. Something a bit like this. That might be a little bit too harsh there. Actually, that might work. And I might be able to exaggerate some of the rotation that we're getting. I feel like this could be exaggerated a little bit as far as how much it's rotating. Here, again, I'm feeling like we really need to get this rotating faster. So like bringing it back one frame, maybe bringing it down here a little bit. This might be happening a little too fast, so I might bring that keyframe down. All right, so that's kind of giving us what we want here. For this, let me go ahead and just jump forward, add a keyframe here. This is going to be rotated pretty far down. And then through here, kind of what we did before, it's going to start to kind of even out at the top of the arc and then kind of start rotating this way toward the end. Basically kind of looking where it's landing there. And then add another keyframe and add kind of like a bit of bounce to this. I might shift this one keyframe over. This might be happening a little too late. So basically what I'm doing now is kind of offsetting the rotation from the bounces a bit. Something like that, and I might actually bring this all the way up a bit to all three of these keyframes up a bit, and then kind of maybe have a final kind of settle on this, something like that. See how this looks? I think that looks all right. This is happening way too slow right here, this rotation down. So what I'm going to do is probably just remove a frame or two from this transition to have it kind of land a little bit faster. Just something like that might work. Maybe able to rotate that tangent handle just a tiny bit. Nice. I think that works pretty well. And like on this, we could probably even get away with like doing another tiny little bounce at the end with the tail rotation a little bit, but we probably don't need to keep kind of adding on to the settle. That might be maybe like a little bit too much that I've done now. So maybe bringing that up a tiny bit. Moving a couple frames from it. Something like that. And obviously we can keep kind of finessing this and tweaking the spacing of this. But really I kind of wanted to just quickly get this in there to show that when we're layering on our detail like this, we're really layering on overlapping action to our animation, because we've just started with up and down motion, and then we actually started to work with the rotation. And obviously the rotation of these bounces is going to be offset from the regular up and down movement. So that's going to incorporate some overlapping action in here. So by doing that, you can see immediately we're starting to kind of breathe more life into this animation by thinking about how we can kind of overlap the rotation that's happening on the bounces with the bounces themselves. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in this demo is just starting to do a bit with the tail. We're probably not going to go through like the entire animation by animating the tail, but I'll probably walk through kind of obviously doing some overlapping action with the tail to add even more to this animation. And typically with a character like this, you don't want to just have the tail in a completely default straight pose and then do the overlapping action on this. If this we're thinking about maybe this is more like a squirrel character. Squirrels typically have like their tail kind of bent and curled up most of the time. So they're not going to have their tail like completely straight. So we wouldn't really want that in our animation. So I'm going to select all of the tail controls here. Make sure I have them all selected. I'm going to press I on my keyboard and I'm going to choose rotation to insert a keyframe for those. And then what I'm going to do is just quickly kind of pose this into something that's basically just a bit more kind of appealing of a tail pose on this character. So maybe something like this. You might be able to bring this control up a bit more. Maybe rotate this one down a bit. Something a bit more like that. So kind of a quick tail shape. And I'm not sure if I like it more up or down on the tail, but I'll go ahead and just keep it like that. We can press I to lock a keyframe down, and I'll choose the keying set on this, and I'll choose rotation so I don't have to always choose that. So what we'll do is just start to frame forward here and start adding a few poses to kind of get this overlapping action kind of in there. So I'm going to bring the whole tail up through this, but then obviously the tail controls, each one's going to be kind of offset a bit from the other one. So like some of these might be dragging slightly behind the other one. So like here, maybe the tail actually starts to straighten out a bit more at the tip. So we're getting this kind of pull feeling on the tail. The root of the tail is kind of following the motion of the ball, but then that's going to kind of drag all the other kind of controls behind it. And this is typically how I would animate something like a tail, is kind of just working straight ahead, going through the entire action, because it's obviously going to be a little bit easier to see what the tail should be doing if you're kind of just working straight ahead like this, kind of one pose at a time. So like here, maybe I'll jump forward to like frame 8 or so, start to rotate the tail up, bring some of these tail controls up higher like this. And again, thinking about the drag we want, maybe the tip of the tail is more like that. This might be out just a tiny bit more. This might not be perfect, but we're starting to kind of get the shape that we want here. And then let's jump forward. We might actually just need to jump forward like one frame here. Let me see. Let me add a keyframe here. And let me try just bringing the tail root down and then dragging the rest of the controls behind, because obviously it's going to be whipping down pretty fast, but the rest of the tail is going to be kind of dragging behind that. And we've got that pose kind of quickly blocked in. So what I'm going to do is jump forward to maybe frame 13. And oftentimes when I'm working like this on a tail and adding, you know, this overlapping action on the tail, I will quickly kind of get those poses in there, but I kind of want to see what's going to happen after that pose. And then oftentimes I'll kind of go back to it once I kind of have all the main poses in there, and then really start to kind of finesse each pose and make sure, you know, each part of the tail is kind of overlapping and flowing nicely with the rest of the tail. So like as it kind of reverses that shape here, I know like through this, the tail is probably going to be down quite a bit, but still kind of the tip of it is going to be kind of favoring where it was. So it might be more kind of like this for this pose right here. So something like that. So we get this really quick like whip of the tail. And again, this is overlapping from the overall up and down motion of the bounces. And then we have the rotation overlapping the bounces. So we're getting kind of all of this stuff sort of working together to create this animation. And then maybe here, frame 19, we'll start to bring the tail controls up to maybe around here. And then what we would need to do is really drag these behind, because again, each tail control is going to kind of drag behind the other one. and the tail is going to want to kind of stay where it was. So even though the kind of base of the tail is pulling up, it's going to cause the rest of the tail to kind of drag behind. So we're getting something like that. And it feels like maybe it might be a little bit delayed there. It's actually not too bad in motion. Let's just add a couple more poses in here before we kind of finish this off. But you should be able to kind of get the idea of what we're doing here is that, each part of the movement here is going to kind of overlap slightly with the other. And it's not just something you'll want to think about just for a tail like this, but the entire ball bounce with the rotation and the bounces themselves, that's all going to kind of play into overlapping action. Maybe we'll go to frame 25, press I to set a keyframe, and then I'll start rotating the tail a bit more up like this. But again, the tip of the tail is probably still going to be kind of favoring where it's coming from, so we'll get some more drag on the very tip of the tail there. Then let's grab all the controls again. Maybe I'll go to frame 27, lock a keyframe down. Then this is where the rest of the tail is going to kind of catch up with the base. So we'll start to get kind of like this reverse shape on the tail. And this might be happening a little too fast over 2 frames, but it might feel okay kind of in motion there. Let's select all these controls again. Then maybe I'll go to frame like 32, lock a keyframe down, and then we can start to get back into kind of the default shape of this tail. Maybe I'll bring the base of the tail up a little bit to get kind of better curl on this. I feel like the tail could probably be up just a tiny bit higher. Just something like that. And you might be able to add like one more extra pose in here. Probably just very subtle kind of motion here. Lock a keyframe down. Then maybe the tail is kind of rotated up like that on frame 37. Then like right on frame 38, we're probably gonna whip the tail down quite a bit. But again, the rest of the tail is gonna want to favor where it came from. So we're like really kind of dragging the tip behind more. Something about like this maybe. Then we can jump forward a couple frames. Then maybe the base of the tail is starting to rotate up, but then we have these kind of dragging behind. Just something like that. And then maybe at the end, I might just throw this into, what we could do? So we might be able to just take some of these poses. Like if I copy this pose, it might be able to work, at this position at some point. And you can definitely kind of reuse a lot of your poses. Like this, maybe it's still, the tip is still kind of dragging a bit more. And then maybe we could find kind of a drag pose to use on the way down. Maybe we could copy this one, paste it in here. Maybe copy this one, paste it right here. So you can see once you actually start creating these tail shapes and these tail poses, you can just start like repurposing them and reusing them through the rest of your animation. And that's something else that's really helpful if you are animating tails like this, is to create kind of a pose library of a lot of the main kind of reverse shapes on the tails and all the main kind of overlapping shapes that you would want. And then you could almost kind of just place them in here as needed. So like here, this ending is doing something very similar to this. So I could probably just copy this pose and paste it somewhere in here, just something like that to quickly kind of finish this off. But yeah, you can see it's still pretty rough. We could go in here and really start refining the in-betweens of this and really start finessing the drag that's happening on the tail. But I think we can go ahead and leave the animation there. So again, this is where overlapping action can really come into play. It's really a part of your entire animation. It's not something that's just a tail or, cloth or hair. We're thinking about overlapping action really for the entire animation because everything's going to be kind of overlapping with one another. The rotation is going to be overlapping with the timing of the bounces. And then the tail is going to be overlapping with, the timing of the rotation. And then beyond that, we'll have each tail control kind of overlapping from the one before it. So I think that's going to wrap up this video. Hopefully you found it helpful and it's given you another way to look at overlapping action and how you can actually implement it into more areas of your animation. And again, utilizing a straight ahead kind of layered approach like this is a good way to kind of get comfortable with adding overlapping action. And it's really fun because kind of each layer that you do add, you'll see your animation kind of slowly take shape more and more. So if you found this video helpful, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like these.